Dozens of Israeli Air Force jets were involved. They struck dozens of targets across Iran.
Pictures from Tehran of people desperately trying to leave that city. Long queues of cars as these Israeli attacks continue.
Tehran has the largest number of ballistic missiles in the Middle East, and some of what it's firing is landing.
Hello and welcome to the Nexus. This week we're looking at the Israel-Iran conflict and in particular the weapons they're using. The two countries have quite different military capabilities when it comes to fighter jets, drones, missiles and bunkers, and they also have very crucial differences when it comes to military intelligence and cyber warfare.
With cyber warfare, it's difficult to figure out who's doing what to whom.
This could not be carried out unless spies and other resources were being used.
More from them in a moment, but first a quick look at the weapons being used so far. On Friday the 13th of June, Israel launched a series of airstrikes across Iran, ostensibly to prevent it from making a nuclear weapon.
Moments ago, Israel launched Operation Rising Lion, a targeted military operation to roll back the Iranian threat to Israel's very survival.
Israeli jets dropped precision-guided bombs and bunker busters, and the damage has been extensive. Iran's Natanz nuclear facility, a uranium conversion facility in Esfahan, a missile complex near Tabriz, and a missile base in Kermanshah. Even the Iranian Revolutionary Guard facilities near Tehran was targeted. Israel is also using drones extensively. They're hidden inside Iran and used for very specific targets, for example, destroying Iranian jets on the ground. Iran's ability to defend itself from all these attacks has been limited since Israel hit its S-300 air defense systems back in October. Now Israeli jets fly over Iran for the most part unchallenged. Iran's mountains are perhaps its greatest natural defense, and even Israeli bombs cannot reach the Fordo nuclear enrichment plant deep under the mountains of central Iran. But there is one that can, America's massive ordnance penetrator, 30,000 pounds or 14,000 kilograms, which can only be dropped by a B-2 stealth bomber. Washington is yet to give these to the Israelis. Now we'll look at Iran's weaponry, and it relies heavily on its ballistic missiles. It has more than any other military in the Middle East, between 2,000 and 3,000. They reach altitudes of over 1,000 kilometers and fall on their targets at supersonic speed. Iran has deployed hundreds against Israel in just a few days, and while Israel's Iron Dome is no match for them, its Arrow 3 defense system has been able to block most, but not all. They've hit Tel Aviv and Haifa and a number of other Israeli cities, causing tremendous damage and many fatalities. Iran is also using drones, sending hundreds of them in to bomb Israeli targets and to confuse Israel's air defenses. Okay, let's bring in our first guest now, and David Des Roches is a former Pentagon official. Thanks for joining us again, David. Really appreciate that. On one side, we are seeing the reliance on fighter jets and drones, and on the other, a big reliance on ballistic missiles. Is this what you expected?
I expected ballistic missiles versus ballistic missiles. I was surprised by how quickly Israel managed to degrade the Iranian air defenses. Missiles are very expensive to use, but they have the advantage of standoff. Fighter jets, if you can ensure they're not shot down, are far more cheaper because they drop cheap bombs that can be produced on an assembly line versus artisanal missiles. So I think what we're seeing here, the weapon choice reflects the reality, which is Iran is firing missiles because they can't do anything else, and Israel is dropping bombs from aircraft because that's what it prefers to do.
Because they can, and that's preferable because it's more precise?
It is more precise, but it's cheaper and it's easier to replace your magazine. So gravity-powered bombs, like the ones the Israelis dropped on the Hamdan airfield, they are produced on an assembly line. There's a lot of them. They're relatively cheap. They're usually less than $100,000, and they're easily replaced. Ballistic missiles are artisanal. They take a long time to make. They require a lot of technology. They're not easily replaced, particularly given the destruction to Iran's missile industrial base. So basically, once Israel achieved enough air control that it could fly manned aircraft, it's now dropping cheap, easily replaced weapons, and Iran's responding with expensive, difficult to replace weapons.
And that expensiveness, that difficulty to replace them, means that Iran, after an initial flurry, has to slow things down.
Well, and their initial flurry, I was expecting the initial Iranian response to be 1,500 missiles. And nobody can defend against 100 missiles at the same spot. You'd get at least 20 through. But Israel managed to degrade Iran's missile inventory with commando attacks, drone attacks at the onset, and they also decapitated their leadership. And then since then, what we've been seeing is fewer than Iranian missiles in the double digits every night. And that number is declining. So what that indicates to me is that their ability to launch missiles and possibly their stores of missiles are declining. And usually it goes sort of like a linear decrease, and then it falls off a cliff. So we're somewhere close to that falling off the cliff point for Iranian missiles.
In that initial first few days, the Iranians sent hundreds, probably 300, 400 ballistic missiles over at Israel. Roughly 1 in 10 got through. How do you rate Israel's air defenses against the ballistic missiles?
Yeah, good question. So the first thing you have to look at is I don't think the system's really been properly tested. So they sent them through in small packages in waves, which allows you to be defeated in detail. What Iran would have been better served if they could do, but they probably couldn't, would be to launch all of them at once and overwhelm defenses. So that indicates to me that Israel has destroyed their launching capacity, and the overall storage of missiles is irrelevant if you can't launch any of them. So it's hard to conduct a detailed analysis. Normally, you can't shoot down everything that's coming your way. You usually prioritize where you think it's going to land, and then you start with the shooting down the missiles that are going to hit things that are most important to you and work your way down the least. Some missiles will land in the desert. You don't intercept them at all. So it would be hard for me to say this, but 90% interception rate is pretty effective.
You've mentioned that Israel was able to degrade Iran's air defenses. That was actually towards the end of last year, wasn't it? And also now attacking the ballistic missile launchers. How did it do those two things?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. So first off, I think that what we're finding is Iranian air defense was never very good to begin with. A lot of the equipment they're manufactured did not perform the way they said it should. I visited the Iranian pavilion at a weapons show several years ago and went, eagerly talked to the very, very friendly people about the specifications. I think what's happening is similar to what we saw in Russia. Given the amount of corruption within the IRGC, there was probably some component substitution where a person was given so much money to have advanced circuitry and realized that he could find something cheaper on eBay, but it doesn't perform as well. The second thing is the role of the decapitation of Iran's command and control in the early days. I think that had an effect because in authoritarian regimes, decisions, particularly important decisions like launching things, are centralized. And that's the case in the Revolutionary Guard. And then finally, I think that there were just physical attacks against missile storage, missile launch facilities by remote drones and possibly by sabotage from within. The Revolutionary Guard has been penetrated by Israeli intelligence, but I think what you had were teams of Israeli operatives who were conducting short-range attacks against both the ballistic missile launch capabilities as well as their air defense capabilities.
David, it's widely reported that dozens of US warplanes have been deployed to Europe. What might that reveal to us about the Pentagon's plan?
Well, the reports I've seen have been aerial tankers, not warplanes, but well, they are warplanes, I guess, but not attack aircraft. But that would allow whatever aircraft we have or whatever aircraft we shift to conduct continuous operations over Iran, given the degradation of Iranian air defenses. So I don't think that this indicates that a large-scale American attack is near. I think it's there as a deterrent. Iranian officials from the start of this have, or even before this, have said, if we're attacked, we will attack not just Americans where they're located throughout the region, but also countries that host Americans, to include Turkey, Greece, Jordan, Egypt. So I think that this is a deterrent to let the hardliners in the regime know, if you think expanding this war will be the way out of it, don't do that, because you can get something that you really don't want.
Everyone's saying that the Fordo nuclear facility buried under the mountains in central Iran cannot be reached except with B-2s and the massive ordnance penetrator 30,000-pound bombs that they carry. Is it likely that these will be brought into play by the Americans?
I think militarily that even that is not an acceptable solution. People misunderstand the nature of enriched uranium. They think it's explosive itself, but it is actually just a metal. And you know, to get a nuclear explosion requires a very, very complicated and intricate assembly to create a nuclear chain reaction. Detonating an explosive, a military explosive, in the proximity, it won't explode the way that gunpowder or dynamite would. So the Fordo complex is under a lot of rock. It's under a mountain, and there's two parallel halls. The massive ordnance penetrator is basically a metal dart with a small explosive charge on top of it. The dart penetrates rock, and then the explosive charge goes off. To destroy that, you would have to hit twice in the same spot, which is very difficult. And then, assuming that you get into one of the halls, the amount of explosion there would be limited. The massive ordnance penetrator would be very effective against an underground ballistic missile site where you have explosive warheads, which would detonate, and motor rockets, rocket motors, which would detonate. But I think for the amount of assurance that Israel wants, it's quite possible you could hit one of the Fordo halls successfully with the massive ordnance penetrator, and a big part of the enriched uranium stock would still be recoverable and usable.
David, both sides are well practiced in cyber warfare. They've got some great hackers on both sides. And yet we've seen relatively little in terms of cyber warfare. Why do you think that is, and do you expect it will be ramped up? So
with cyber warfare, of course, one of the things that makes it so interesting is it's difficult to figure out who's doing what to whom. And sometimes you get a problem and it takes a while to figure out what caused it, and then it takes even longer to figure out who caused it. And the fingerprints are often ambiguous. I think there is cyber warfare going on. I think that we're seeing, for example, the Israelis are doing a rather sophisticated operation to destroy, or at least take over cryptocurrency accounts linked to the Iranian regime to deprive them of the ability to rebuild their military capabilities once this campaign is ended. I think that we will see perhaps a less effective but generalized Iranian campaign. The Iranians, of course, claim to have breached the Dimona nuclear reactor administrative offices and their email accounts prior to this. And what I've seen indicates that they got their administrative email accounts, so their day-to-day operational email accounts. That will go on for the foreseeable future, but I think it will not have an immediate tactical effect. There is a possibility that there was a cyber component that led to the paralyzation of Iran's air defenses. That is a possibility, but we won't know that for some months, if we ever do, with any assurance.
David Des Roches, thanks so much for that. Really appreciate it. We're going to look at the role intelligence plays in all this now. And for Israel, it has been instrumental in the assassination of senior Iranian figures, such as the head of the IRGC, the head of Iran's intelligence services, and a number of top nuclear scientists, all put down to Mossad. Iran claims to have hit Mossad's HQ, and it has a history of very strong intelligence links with groups across the region. Let's bring in Malcolm Nance now. He's a former US Naval Intelligence Officer. Welcome to the program, Malcolm. How important has intelligence been in this conflict?
This is an intelligence-driven campaign that's being carried out. every target, every individual, every location is because there is deep knowledge of where they're located, what the significance is. So this could not be carried out unless spies and other resources were being used to gather that information.
Let's take Israel's intelligence first of all. How would you assess its strengths and weaknesses so far?
Well, its strengths have been brilliant. I mean, we have to give them credit where credit is due. Their human intelligence is what's quite surprising here. That's bringing people into Iran, using people in Iran to gain precise information about locations and individuals. Then their broader intelligence, signals intelligence, imagery through satellites is a component that's shared by the United States and Israel. But for them to synthesize all of this information, quite possibly over decades, to come down to a short, high intensity warfighting campaign, this shows intelligence brilliance. Also, a little bit of the brilliance that they were missing on 10/7 when Hamas defeated them and invaded southern Israel. But with regards to Iran, Israel knows its game.
What are its particular strengths when it comes to Iran?
With regards to Iran, I think the fact that they understand how big the country is, they actually had spies on the ground. That's very hard to do. That requires people of that ethnicity, the local language, the culture, having relationships and being able to buy information or carry out operations there. That is very, very difficult. That's one of their great strengths.
And a similar question for the Iranian side. What are their strengths and weaknesses?
Well, I'm quite surprised. The Iranian strength of the precision of where some of the ballistic missiles that they've fired have struck. I know that there was one strike in Tel Aviv that was very clearly focused on an Iron Dome missile site, and it missed by a matter of meters and fell into a civilian area. That means that their information, which is probably more satellite driven, space-based driven collection, has been extraordinarily good. I mean, we saw how many of their resources have failed because the Israelis have defeated them. Their human intelligence is awful. I mean, we've seen them try to recruit people inside of Israel to no avail. But their space-based reconnaissance and space-based targeting has been very good, even though it's hard for them to get weapons through to strike Israel.
And given what's happened to its allies in the region, Hamas and Hezbollah and so on, did that affect Iran's ability to gather intelligence on its enemy?
Well, it certainly did, because Iran uses proxies that are in direct contact and direct conflict with Israel. Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, for example, would have a better opportunity to make inroads of information that they can see themselves, and not to mention try to have relationships with people who might be inside of Israel. Yemen, none. That really, they're just a proxy that is a ballistic missile launch platform against Israel. The loss of Syria certainly gave them a lot of information that was coming from Russia that Iran could have benefited from. They are flying blind now. They are just exchanging punches. And right now, Iran is going on what they had before this war started.
And in terms of cyber warfare, both of them are well versed in cyber warfare. They have great hackers on both sides. But it seems to not be a very big component of this conflict so far. Why do you think that is?
Well, that's because cyber warfare is just another one of the tools in the warfighting chest. Iran actually has a very good capability. A few years ago, they practically froze the entirety of Saudi oil production by hacking into computers and infecting them with viruses. But Israel's capability, I suspect, which we've only started to see, is just another weapon that is waiting for its turn in the queue to actually be thrown at Iran. For regime stability, you know, it's not important to actually freeze all the banking or all the internet of the Iranian people. Their job, Israel, is to destabilize the regime by allowing a free flow of information that the regime has already cut off. So we're waiting to see them actually throw a very solid punch in cyber warfare.
Malcolm Nance, thanks so much. Really appreciate that. Thank you. Well, Iran's regional allies are on the back foot, but can it still depend on Russia? A former colonel on NATO's international intelligence staff tells us that the relationship is still critical.
Is Netanyahu going to back off? No. Is Iran going to back off? No. What's the limiting factor here? It's munitions. So sooner or later, Israel is going to run out of missiles. And they'll then come to Uncle Sam and say, Daddy Big Bucks, we want more. Now there is a problem for America. Equally, Iran has got 2,000 missiles sitting in the bank. They can go over the border to Russia and say, can we have some of your missiles, please? And the Russians, who are happy to stir the pot, will say, sure, how many you want, Tovarish?
Of course, Russia has been an ally of Iran for a long time, supplying it with nuclear and military technology for decades. Russia built Iran's Bushehr nuclear facility and supplied it with air defense systems, including the S-300s, which were destroyed by Israel last year. Most of Iran's fighter jets are also made in Russia, and Russia uses some of Iran's technology too. The Shahed is now the country's main drone. Well, Sergei Markov is a former advisor to President Vladimir Putin. We asked him whether Iran can still rely on Russian support.
I think Russia will be ready to give some military support to Iran. But at the same time, as I understand, Russian opportunity is limited because Russia taking part in the very intensive Ukrainian war. In the past, Iran gave a lot of rocket missiles and drones to Russia. I'm sure that Russia will give, first of all, anti-rocket missile system to Iran because it's very important for Iran right now. But also, Russia cannot give a lot of them because Russian territory intensively attacked by Ukrainian regime. Iran understands very well that Russia has limited opportunity to give support to Iran.
Okay, let's round off this discussion now with Shahram Kholdi. He's originally from Iran and is now an academic in Canada. Welcome to the program, Shahram. The President of the United States has boasted that, quote, we have complete and total control of the skies over Iran. What do you make of that?
He basically is trying to push the Islamic Republic Supreme Leader Sayyid Ali Khamenei against the wall and force an unconditional surrender upon them. This is not the first time that President Trump has spoken like this towards others, the Houthis, Hamas, and others. But it remains to be seen as to whether the United States will really engage in a joint operation against the Iranian armed forces.
But specifically about Iran's air defenses, given how much the Iranian government has spent on powers, proxy powers in the region and on its nuclear development, nuclear program, do you think that it spent an inadequate amount of time, effort, resources on its air defenses?
It appears to be so. Of course, they are claiming that if they had the latest S-500 air defense from Russia, maybe that would be better. But Russia itself has its own plate full because of the Ukraine war, not to mention that they receive drones from the Islamic Republic. And so what is happening right now is that the Islamic Republic, over the past 30 years, decided that focusing on developing jet fighters was not a wise course of action relative to their own limitations. So they decided to be focusing on all sorts of ballistic missiles and proxies, as you mentioned. The problem is that air defenses are at the core of being able to maintain defense and to launch offense. So overall, it seems that the shambolic manner they handled the whole development of the air defense systems, and I would say to a large degree, systemic and structural lack of discipline, as well as systematic corruption within the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps have been the cause of their undoing as we see today.
So the French leader Emmanuel Macron told reporters that Donald Trump left the G7 in your country, in Canada, so that he could seek a ceasefire between Israel and Iran. Then on Air Force One, President Trump corrected that and said, I'm not looking for a ceasefire. I'm looking for, quote, unconditional surrender from Iran. What would that look like?
Well, it basically means that either President Trump has not been clear with President Macron, or he simply changed his mind. And one of the reasons that the Iranians find themselves in this conundrum is that they thought that because President Trump, over a host of different issues, whether be it the tariffs or Ukraine-Russia conflict and the way he has mediated in the conflict, has constantly switched side, has constantly, in addition to switching sides, has constantly changed his rhetoric for or against one side. I think they very much thought that he was bluffing, and they really tried to stall during the negotiations. I think on Air Force One, Trump decided that relative to the power and the prowess of the attack by Israel and the inability of the Islamic Republic to respond, in addition to whatever counsel he has received from his advisors, he has to basically, as we say in Persian, to push the Islamic Republic to the cusp of death so that the Islamic Republic would settle for a very high fever.
Shahram Kholdi, thank you so much for your analysis today. Much appreciated. And thank you at home and on your phones for watching. Until next week then, goodbye.